Hi, welcome to this corner of YouTube. My name is Faith, your local Pride and Prejudice fan, and welcome to my presentation, Why We Need to Stop Comparing the 1995 and 2005 adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. In 1995, the BBC released a new miniseries adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, written by Andrew Davis and directed by Simon Langton. It was a big hit, bringing in 10 million viewers each week. It earned praise from critics and audiences alike, and it even won a BAFTA, among other awards. 10 years later, in 2005, a new feature film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice was released. It was directed by Joe Wright and written by Deborah Magach. Just like the 95 miniseries, it was also a big hit, and it also won a BAFTA. These two works are still the most popular Pride and Prejudice adaptations. In fact, when you Google Pride and Prejudice, the first two results that come up after the Wikipedia page for the novel are the IMDb pages for the 95 and 2005 version. Among the praise and popularity that each version has gotten, something else has developed over the years: a feud. Specifically over which version is considered the better version, whether that's because some fans think that the handflex scene is superior to the lake dive scene, or because they think that one actor's portrayal of Mr. Darcy is better than the other. These two works are often pitted against each other. I'm here to finally settle the debate by saying that this shouldn't be a debate at all. Ashley Clements, who played Lizzie Bennet in the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, explains this best.
Do you have any Austen hot takes?
I feel like I have an anti-hot take,
Mm.
especially because, you know, I did not ever imagine that I would become a person who's so strongly associated with Jane Austen that I would frequently be asked these questions. My hot take is that you actually cannot compare the 1995 miniseries to the 2005 film of Pride and Prejudice because they're literally different mediums. One of them very successfully tells the story in 6 hours, and with that much time, obviously, can include a lot more detail from the book. The other very successfully condenses a much longer story into 2 hours, which is really difficult to do. And it does it very well and very smartly. It takes events that happen at different parties and balls spread over months, all happen at the same party. What a just smart way to condense it. But they're literally different things.
I'd like to expand on this take because she's right. We shouldn't compare the two. And here's why. As mentioned before, the mediums are different. Films are supposed to tell one story within the span of 2 to 2.5 hours, whereas shows have multiple episodes in a season to tell that story. That means a movie needs to introduce the world, set up the characters and conflicts, and provide complete story and/or character arcs to keep things interesting and engaging for the audience within the span of 2 hours. For the 2005 movie, cuts and changes had to be made due to the limitations on time. The film does this by cutting some characters who don't play as major of a role in the story, like Sir William Lucas and Mr. and Mrs. Hurst, and by combining certain story beats into fewer scenes versus having them occur across larger spans of time. A great example of this is Elizabeth's acquaintance with Mr. Wickham. In the novel, it takes place over the course of several chapters, but in the movie, it's effectively depicted in just a few scenes. In an earlier scene, while Lydia and Kitty watch the militia march into town, they explain their plan to drop their handkerchiefs so one of the soldiers can pick it up and thus are properly introduced. This sets up Lizzie's first meeting with Wickham when she's walking with her sisters into town and accidentally drops her handkerchief. Wickham immediately picks it up and returns it to her. Their eyes meet, and it's clear that Lizzie's attracted to him. In the next scene, she has a witty conversation that shows their deepening flirtation and builds Lizzie's sense of trust in him, so that when he lies about Darcy denying his inheritance, it's easy for the audience to see why she believes him. Then that conversation sets up her resentment toward Darcy at the Netherfield ball. This is all done within the span of 3 minutes, with each scene adding more intrigue to the plot. As a result of changes like this, the story is more streamlined and leaves enough time to focus on developing its core romance. Meanwhile, the miniseries had 6 one-hour episodes to develop the world and had time to include more details from the novel. This is especially true for the dialogue. As talented of an author as Jane Austen is, her writing can be more verbose at times, so while the film had to cut things down for time, the show had more room to include those lines in their entirety or at least something very close to it. Mr. Darcy's infamous first proposal is almost a line-for-line repetition of what's in the novel, performed with much haughtiness from Colin Firth and conviction from Jennifer Ely that emotionally heightens the text and successfully depicts the duo's tension coming to a head. The miniseries is no stranger to making changes to the text either. Andrew Davis actually added scenes from Darcy's perspective that were not in the novel to the show. On writing these scenes, Davis said, "I thought it would be nice to give us moments where we could be with Darcy and experience the world a little bit alongside him. I wanted to show him as often as possible as a natural man." In both cases, the changes that the creators made were purposeful for telling the story in a way that fit their respective mediums. So when it comes to adaptations, change isn't always a bad thing. The second reason that we need to stop the comparisons is that the filmmakers had different intentions for their respective adaptations. Davis perceived the novel as not just being a social commentary, but also about desire in young people and hormones. That is a direct quote. Because of that, he wrote in many youthful, energetic elements, such as the Bennett sisters having conversations while taking walks, or the men of the series engaging in athletic activities like fencing or horseback riding. Davis also plays up the aspect of desire in the script through certain moments alone with Darcy. There's a moment in episode 1 after he takes a bath, and he admires Lizzie outside playing with one of the dogs from Netherfield grounds. It highlights his being drawn to her despite his appearance otherwise, an attraction that will have a great influence over his relationship with Lizzie. Wright approached Pride and Prejudice as a capital R romance, with a primary focus on Lizzie herself. To quote Wright, "It is a rite of passage story, so I wanted to make it the Lizzie Bennet version. To me, I think the point of that romance brings her to a deeper understanding of herself." To emphasize this, the film depicts several scenes of Lizzie deep in thought, putting her perspective front and center. For example, when she conceals from Jane Darcy's involvement in keeping her from seeing Bingley, the camera focuses on her silently crying. Another instance is when she contemplates her feelings for Darcy alone in a field after refusing to promise Lady Catherine that she wouldn't marry him. The differences in interpretation are easily seen in how each version is filmed. The 2005 version has an earthy atmosphere and emphasizes much of the surrounding nature of the English countryside. There's a lived-in aspect to Longbourn House and the surrounding village that gives the settings character. In an interview with IndieWire, Wright explains his reasoning behind the film's aesthetic. "I wanted a sense of the elements, of mud and rain. It occurred to me that love is an elemental force, and I wanted to set it in the context of other elements. And it seemed to me that if Elizabeth had a very earthbound existence, then her aspiration for romantic love would be all the more heroic." Meanwhile, the miniseries is filmed in a more standard manner associated with modern TV. Pretty much shot, reverse shot, wide shots to establish where the characters are. However, it still uses certain shots to its advantage, like the close-ups that reveal character reactions. The next reason why these two versions should not be compared is that each work was made in a different era of pop culture, and they had different precedents to follow up. Prior to the 95 miniseries, the BBC released several other miniseries adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, most of which were filmed in a similar format, with interior scenes shot on studio sets and only exterior scenes shot on film. This unfortunately gave many of these adaptations a stiff look that came to be the stereotype of BBC period dramas at that time. On this issue, Simon Langton said, "Despite heroic efforts on the part of the designers and lighting supervisors to conceal this difference, the contrast between the two was often all too apparent. This was exemplified for me when my 12-year-old stepdaughter walked through the living room while I was watching an old tape of the previous 1980 production of Pride and Prejudice. She paused for a moment to watch, then strode off to the next room uttering a sort of, 'Ugh.' 'Why did you make that noise?' I asked. 'Well,' she answered, 'it all looks so artificial,' and stalked out of the room." For this production, Langton had the opportunity to shoot the entire series on film, which gave it a more realistic and cinematic look than its predecessors. This, along with the choice to play up the elements of desire and money, set the series apart from previous adaptations and made it a groundbreaking piece of work for its time. The success of their production also paved the way for future BBC period dramas to be shot more cinematically. Before the movie was released, the only major feature film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice was the 1941 starring Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier. There were also a few modern-day ones like Bride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones's Diary, among others. At the time, it had been 65 years since there was a period piece feature adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Therefore, that left the opportunity for Wright and the creative team of the film to provide a new dynamic spin on the story. The film is also different in that it's the first one set closest to the time of Austen writing the book. There are some complaints that this version isn't period accurate, but Wright actually chose to set the film in the 1790s when Austen first wrote Pride and Prejudice rather than 1813 when the book was published. This is one of the changes that distinguishes the film visually and is the reason why the costumes look different from what one usually sees from Regency era dramas. This choice, along with its visually breathtaking cinematography, provided a film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice that audiences have never seen before, and it introduced a new generation to the beloved story. And now, the last reason this comparison needs to stop. Does this really matter? Both adaptations have their merits, and at the end of the day, people can still watch whatever version they prefer. They have made a profound impact on pop culture and have brought more people into the Jane Austen fandom, which, in my book at least, makes them both very successful adaptations. The point of having various adaptations is interpreting stories in new and unique ways. Both versions are doing just that, showcasing Austen's work in a new light. Thank you for watching. This video was part of the 2024 virtual JaneCon. For those of you watching this video, I highly recommend that you check out the other ones on the virtual JaneCon playlist.